Rich woman throws food at a beggar. She never expected Keanu Reeves to step in. Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. It was a chilly evening in downtown Los Angeles. The kind where the wind cuts through your coat and finds its way to your bones. The streets were buzzing with life. Couples laughing, cars honking, and a faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee escaping from nearby cafes. Amidst the bustling crowd, a frail elderly man sat on the corner of the street, his clothes tattered and his eyes weary. People passed him without a second glance, their hurried steps echoing indifference. He stretched his hand out to a passing woman, her heels clicking loudly on the pavement. She was elegantly dressed, her designer bag shimmering under the streetlights. She paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. "Do you think begging will get you anywhere?" she scoffed, her voice laced with disdain. Her reaction was swift and shocking. She grabbed the remains of her half-eaten sandwich from her bag and threw it at him. The sandwich landed on the pavement with a splatter, a mixture of bread and sauce now smeared across the ground. The crowd gasped softly, but no one stepped forward. People exchanged awkward glances and then looked away, pretending not to notice. That wasn't necessary. A calm but firm voice cut through the tension. The woman froze, her expression shifting from arrogance to confusion. Slowly, she turned around to see a tall figure stepping out of the shadows. Keanu crouched down, picked up the soiled sandwich, and gently placed it beside the beggar. "You had a choice," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "You didn't have to humiliate him. And who are you to lecture me? You don't know anything about me," she snapped. "Kindness doesn't cost anything," Keanu said. "Yet somehow it's the hardest thing for some people to give." The crowd, which had been silently observing, began to gather closer, murmurs spreading among them. The woman opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. There was something about Keanu's presence that left her speechless. As the tension hung thick in the air, no one noticed the subtle shift in the beggar's posture. His trembling hand reached for something in his pocket, his expression unreadable. The beggar's hand emerged slowly from his pocket, clutching an old, folded piece of paper. His movements were shaky, and his eyes darted between Keanu and the woman. The crowd's murmurs quieted as curiosity spread among them. Even the woman, still flustered from Keanu's words, couldn't help but stare. "Sir," the beggar's voice cracked, barely audible over the hum of the street. "I need to show you something." Keanu crouched down again, meeting the man at eye level. "Take your time," he said gently, his tone stripped of any judgment. The man unfolded the paper with care, as though it were the most valuable possession he had. The corners were frayed, and the writing was faded, but the words were still legible. Keanu's eyes scanned the paper, his expression shifting from curiosity to something deeper, something unspoken. "What's that?" the woman snapped, folding her arms defensively as she took a step closer. "Some sob story to make us feel guilty?" Keanu ignored her, his attention fully on the beggar. "This," he began, his voice slightly shaking. "This is your resume?" The beggar nodded slowly, his face a mixture of shame and hope. "I wasn't always like this," he murmured. "I had a job, a family. But life doesn't always go the way you plan." Keanu's jaw tightened. He read through the list of qualifications on the paper, the man's past achievements painting a stark contrast to the reality he now faced. "You were an engineer," Keanu said, almost to himself. "I was," the man replied, tears pooling in his eyes. "But one mistake, one accident, and everything fell apart." The woman let out a small laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "Are we seriously standing here listening to this nonsense? If he was so great, why is he sitting on the street begging for scraps?" Keanu stood up, his full height towering over her. "Because life isn't fair," he said firmly, his voice carrying an edge that silenced her instantly. "Because people like you judge without knowing the story. and because too many of us choose to look away instead of offering a hand. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably, whispers rippling through the onlookers. Keanu turned back to the beggar, his expression softening. "What's your name?" he asked. "Robert," the man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, Robert," Keanu said, tucking the resume into his jacket pocket, "you don't belong here, and we're going to fix that." The woman scoffed, rolling her eyes. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? Magic?" Keanu glanced at her, his face unreadable. "No," he said simply. "Just decency." The crowd erupted into murmurs once more, the tension in the air now replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. No one knew what Keanu was planning, but they couldn't look away. The woman, however, looked far from convinced, her arrogance slowly giving way to unease. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. As he dialed a number, his eyes locked with Robert's. "You're not invisible," he said quietly. "Not anymore." The woman's unease deepened as Keanu slipped his phone back into his pocket, his attention never wavering from Robert. The tension in the air was palpable, each second stretching into eternity as the crowd watched in silence. "Listen," Keanu said softly, crouching back down to Robert's level. "I know what it feels like to lose everything, but I also know that it's never too late to start again." Robert's lips trembled, the weight of Keanu's words sinking in. "But how?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "I've tried and failed." Keanu placed a reassuring hand on Robert's shoulder. "Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you." The woman rolled her eyes, her voice cutting through the moment like a knife. "This is ridiculous. You can't just fix his life with words. People like him are where they are because they make bad choices. It's not my fault he's here." Keanu's eyes shifted to her, his calm demeanor hiding the storm brewing beneath. "And what about the choice you just made?" he asked. "The choice to belittle someone already struggling instead of lifting them up? What does that say about you?" Her face turned crimson, but she said nothing. The crowd, now larger than before, murmured in agreement. Keanu stood up, his presence commanding the space. "Robert," Keanu said, turning back to him, "do you trust me?" Robert hesitated, confusion flickering in his eyes. I don't even know you." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes trust is all we have." Before Robert could respond, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. The driver stepped out, dressed sharply, and walked over to Keanu with a respectful nod. The crowd gasped softly, their curiosity piquing. "What's going on?" the woman blurted, her voice tinged with both disbelief and frustration. Keanu gestured towards the car. "Robert, let's get you cleaned up. There's a place I know where people care, where they'll help you rebuild. But only if you're ready." Robert's eyes filled with tears, his hands trembling. Why would you do this for me?" Keanu's expression softened, a rare vulnerability crossing his face. "Because someone once did it for me," he said quietly. The woman stood frozen, her arrogance crumbling as the scene unfolded. The crowd erupted into quiet applause, a few wiping away tears. As Keanu helped Robert to his feet, the woman's voice rang out one last time. "You can't save everyone," she said bitterly. Keanu paused, glancing over his shoulder. "No," he replied, "but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try." With that, he guided Robert into the car, leaving the woman standing in stunned silence as the crowd watched the vehicle disappear into the night. Inside the sleek black car, Robert sat in silence, his hands clutching the folded resume as if it were a lifeline. He glanced at Keanu, who sat beside him, his gaze fixed out the window. For a moment neither of them spoke, the hum of the car engine filling the space. "Why me?" Robert finally asked, his voice barely audible. "There are so many others. Why stop for someone like me?" Keanu turned to face him, his expression thoughtful. "Because I've been where you are," he said simply. "I know what it's like to feel invisible, to think no one cares. But someone once reminded me that we all deserve a second chance. Maybe it's my turn to pass that on." Robert's throat tightened and he looked down at the resume in his hands. "I don't know if I can do it," he admitted. "I've been down for so long. I don't even know where to start." Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady but encouraging. "You start by believing it's possible. The rest comes one step at a time." The car came to a smooth stop in front of a modest yet inviting building. A sign above the door read, "Hope Haven, a place to rebuild." The warm glow from the windows spilled onto the street, and inside, people could be seen working, talking, and smiling. "This is it," Keanu said, gesturing to the building. Robert hesitated, his grip on the resume tightening. What if they don't accept me?" Keanu smiled gently. "They will. This place was built for people like you, people who just need a chance. And I'll be here to make sure you get it." As they stepped out of the car, the door to the building opened, and a woman in her late 40s approached them. She wore a kind smile, her eyes filled with warmth. "Keanu," she greeted, shaking his hand. "It's good to see you again. And who's this?" "This is Robert," Keanu said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "He's ready for a fresh start." The woman extended her hand to Robert, who hesitated before shaking it. "Welcome, Robert," she said warmly. "We'll take good care of you." Robert looked at Keanu, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "Just promise me one thing. When you're back on your feet, help someone else who needs it. That's how we make the world better, one person at a time." As Robert stepped inside, the warmth of the place enveloping him, Keanu stayed behind, watching him disappear into the building. He turned to the woman. "He's got potential," he said. "He just needs a little support." She nodded. "We'll make sure he gets it. You have a knack for finding these stories, Keanu." Keanu smiled faintly, his eyes reflecting both hope and pain. "It's not about finding them," he said quietly. "It's about noticing them." As the car pulled away, Keanu glanced out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of color. For a moment, he allowed himself to reflect on his own journey, the struggles he had faced, and the people who had lifted him when he needed it most. And somewhere in the back of his mind he wondered, how many more Roberts were out there, waiting for someone to notice? The following morning, the story of the previous night began to ripple through the city. A bystander had captured the entire incident on their phone and shared it online. The video went viral within hours, sparking debates and conversations across social media platforms. The clip showed Keanu kneeling beside Robert, helping him to his feet, and confronting the arrogant woman. But what resonated the most with viewers was the raw emotion in Keanu's words. "You're not invisible. Not anymore." News outlets picked up the story, framing it as another example of Keanu's humility and compassion. Headlines like, "Keanu Reeves' kind gesture goes viral," and "A Hollywood star's simple act of humanity touches millions," dominated feeds. Back at Hope Haven, Robert sat in a small room, surrounded by staff who were guiding him through the first steps of rebuilding his life. He'd been given clean clothes, a warm meal, and a chance to speak with a career counselor. For the first time in years, he felt seen, not as a beggar on the street, but as a man with potential. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. The counselor opened it to reveal Keanu standing there holding a folder. "Mind if I join you?" Keanu asked with a gentle smile. Robert's face lit up with surprise. "You're back?" Keanu stepped inside, placing the folder on the table. "I promised I'd help you get started, didn't I?" Opening the folder, Keanu revealed a list of contacts. potential employers, community programs, and mentorship opportunities tailored to Robert's skills. "I made a few calls," Keanu explained. "Some people owe me favors. Turns out they're more than happy to give you a shot." Robert stared at the folder, overwhelmed. This is too much. I don't deserve all this." Keanu leaned forward, his tone firm yet kind. "You deserve a chance, Robert. That's all this is. What you do with it, that's up to you." Tears welled up in Robert's eyes. He wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but Keanu placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," Keanu said softly. "Let yourself feel it. This is your turning point." Outside the room, the staff exchanged glances, their admiration for Keanu evident. One of them whispered, "He doesn't just help, he makes people believe in themselves again." Meanwhile, across town, the rich woman from the restaurant sat in her office, scrolling through her phone. Her face turned pale as she watched the viral video, the comments filled with outrage at her behavior. Words like heartless, disgraceful, and entitled flooded the feed. For the first time, she felt the sting of public judgment. But more than that, she felt something else, a nagging sense of shame. She replayed Keanu's words in her head. "What does your choice say about you?" Unable to shake the guilt, she made a decision. Picking up her phone, she dialed a number she never thought she'd call. "This is going to sound strange," she began, her voice hesitant. "But I need to make something right." Unbeknownst to her, the story was far from over. While Keanu focused on helping Robert rebuild his life, the woman's unexpected move would set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Weeks later, Robert stood outside a cafe, nervously adjusting the collar of his clean, pressed shirt. His reflection in the glass door showed a man he hardly recognized, neatly groomed, standing tall, and brimming with cautious optimism. It was his first day at his new job, thanks to one of the contacts Keanu had arranged. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The manager greeted him warmly, guiding him to his position behind the counter. Robert moved with a mix of excitement and hesitation, eager to prove himself. As customers trickled in, he offered them genuine smiles, his confidence slowly building with every interaction. Across town, Keanu was back at the restaurant where the story began, sitting at the same table by the window. He sipped his coffee thoughtfully, watching people go about their day. It wasn't long before a familiar figure walked in, the rich woman. She hesitated when she saw him, but then approached cautiously. "Keanu," she began, her voice softer than he remembered. "May I sit?" Keanu gestured to the seat across from him. "Of course." For a moment, there was silence. She fidgeted with her hands, struggling to find the right words. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened that night," she said finally. "And about what you said." Keanu raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I realized you were right," she admitted. "My choices say everything about who I am, and I didn't like what they said. I was cruel, judgmental, and wrong." She looked down, her voice trembling. "I want to make amends." Keanu studied her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. "What are you planning to do?" "I've already started," she said, her tone more confident now. "I've been donating to shelters and programs like the one Robert's in, and I've been volunteering. I'm trying to be better." Keanu nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "That's a good start. Change doesn't happen overnight, but recognizing it is the first step." She hesitated, then asked, "How's Robert?" Keanu's smile widened. "Why don't you see for yourself?" The woman's brow furrowed in confusion, but before she could ask what he meant, Keanu stood and gestured for her to follow him. Minutes later, they arrived at the cafe. Through the window, they saw Robert behind the counter, confidently taking orders and chatting with customers. His transformation was undeniable. The woman watched in awe, her heart heavy with regret, but also filled with a strange sense of hope. He looks Happy, she murmured. He is, Keanu replied, because someone believed in him. At that moment, Robert glanced outside and spotted Keanu. His face lit up with a smile, and he waved enthusiastically. Keanu waved back, his expression proud and content. The woman turned to Keanu, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you, she said. Not just for helping him, but for helping me see things differently. Keanu shrugged lightly, his gaze never leaving Robert. Kindness isn't just about helping others. It's about reminding ourselves what it means to be human. As they stood there, watching Robert thrive, it became clear that this story wasn't just about a single act of kindness. It was about the ripple effect. How one moment, one choice could change lives and inspire others to do the same. And somewhere, in the hearts of those who heard this story, another ripple began to form.